Welcome to our few moments together on the Parsha. This Shabbos, of course, we have the privilege of reading Parshas Tzav, and the Shabbos is not only a Shabbos in which we read Parshas Tzav, but it's also known as Shabbos Hagadol. In Parshas Tzav, which talks about some other karbanos following last week's Sedra of Vayikra, one of the karbanos that it mentions is the karban toda, which is essentially a karban shlamim, which has in it the responsibility to eat the karban shlamim in a limited amount of time. And when the shlamim is brought, it has to be brought with 40 loaves of different types of bread. 30 of them are Matza type loaves, and 10 are chametz loaves. And because they're chametz loaves, the karban toda was never brought on Pesach. And that's why we don't say Mizmar L'Soda on Pesach. In addition, we don't even say Mizmar L'Soda, which is a psalm of the karban toda, on Erev Pesach, because Erev Pesach would limit the amount of time in which all these loaves and all that karban could be eaten, and therefore we don't say Mizmar L'Soda Erev Pesach. When talking about this karban toda, this thanks offering, the Gemara in Brachos, on Nun Dalid, tells us that there are 4 people who have to bring a karban toda. If someone, for instance, was sick and got up from the sickness which confined him to bed, or someone was imprisoned and placed in a jail and was released, or someone who crossed the ocean, the Yam, or someone who crossed a midbar, a wilderness, and came out whole and complete. These 4 had to bring a karban toda. And as our Chazal have told us, it's encapsulated in the word v'chol hachayim yodu chosela, and all those who are alive give you thanks, Sela. And the word chayim includes chola, someone who was sick, someone who was yisurim, placed in a prison that caused pain, so to speak, and someone who crossed the Yam, and finally, someone who crossed the Midbar. Chola, Yisurim, Yam, and Midbar spell the word chayim. And in fact, the Rosh on that Gemara mentions that we have to say a Birchas HaGomel today for these same 4. If someone travels across the ocean, even not across the ocean, in an airplane, which is something that we could not survive without the unique divine guidance of keeping the plane above, like a ship afloat, we also have to say Birchas HaGomel, someone who was sick, someone who was let out of prison, someone who crossed the wilderness, in an accident, any difficulty, we say a Birchas HaGomel. Now, when we say a Birchas HaGomel, we say that Hashem, we are thanking Him for HaGomel Achayovim Tovos Shegamalani Kol Tov, that He who has granted to those who have been Chayov, those who were required to have whatever happened to them, happened and ended up being good. The Medrash, when talking about the karban toda, it quotes a pasuk in Tehillim by David HaMelech at the end of Perek Nun, in which it says, Zoveach toda yechabdanani. One who brings the karban toda has granted me honor. When it says yechabdanani, the Medrash says yechabduni lo nemar. It doesn't say he gives me honor, but yechabdanani. There's an extra nun over there. And the pasuk continues, Zoveach toda yechabdanani. Someone who slaughtered the karban toda has given me honor. And of course, the concept being that it wasn't just a physical karban, but the person has taken all the ideals of the karban toda and brought it before Hashem, v'sam derech, and he has placed that concept of thankfulness in front of his life to know how to go. That kind of thankfulness, v'sam derech, promises Erenu b'yesha Elokim. I will show him the salvation of Hashem. The Medrash, when talking about that extra nun, why is it there? Says the Kesav Sofer. He says, why is the extra nun there? Because when one gives thanks after a difficult time and they emerged whole, they were sick, or they crossed the desert or the wilderness, and they emerged whole, they not only have to give thanks for the salvation, but they're also giving thanks for even being put in that position to begin with. They recognize that being in the position of the difficulty enhanced their lives because it caused them to think about being in this Matza, being in this dangerous circumstance, and how they reviewed their lives and perhaps made some tikkun, some correction. And by virtue of being in the difficulty and recognizing that being put in that difficulty, they didn't ask for it, they don't want it, but nevertheless they need it because it helps them to grow. And therefore, says the Ksav Sofer, Zoveach Toda, when someone brings that Korban Toda, Yechab Danani, I will dually give honor to Hashem because, number one, I recognize that being put in the difficulty to begin with was worthwhile, and number two, for the salvation that occurred because I emerged from that difficulty. And eventually we hope everyone emerges from whatever difficulty they have. It's interesting to note that the Haggadah parallels this idea in many ways. For instance, we say, V'hi sha'amda lavoseinu v'lanu, and this promise that God made to Avram Avinu, the promise Hashem made to Avram, our forefather, at the bris bein habesarim, at the covenant between the pieces. Hashem said to him, you should surely know that your children will be strangers in a land not theirs for 400 years. Not only that, but they will enslave them and they will afflict them. And afterwards, they will leave with great wealth. And afterwards, they will leave with a great wealth. Immediately after that sentence, they will leave with a great wealth. We lift our cup, give a toast to Hashem, and we say V'hi. And this promise that Hashem has told us that we will leave with great wealth, that has stood for our forefathers and us at all times. Because whenever we were oppressed, ultimately Hashem promises that we will leave, so to speak, with great wealth. Perhaps the V'hi and this promise is not only referring to the leaving with great wealth, it's even referring to the being enslaved to begin with. For we Jews recognize we don't want to be enslaved. We never wanted to be enslaved. But we recognize that being a stranger in a land not ours and being enslaved and afflicted has given us a love of freedom that transcends the love of freedom any human being has. In fact, it's used as a paradigm for all those who are oppressed. In the time of the United States of America in the Civil War, when the slaves were oppressed, one of their spirituals spoke about, go down Moses, wade down to Egypt's land, tell old Pharaoh, let my people go, because the freedom that the Jewish people evidenced became an example for all humanity to be free. We don't want to be enslaved, but we recognize the gift that once we were enslaved, it gave us a love of freedom that we thank Hashem not only for the enslavement, but for the freedom that comes afterwards. So again, we see this duality of Zoveach Toda, Yechab Danani, and if it's some derech, we place it as our path in life to love both elements, even the trials and tribulations and the freedom, Erenu b'yesha Elokim, we will see the salvation of Hashem. It's also evident in the Arba Abanim, in the four sons, where it says, Baruch HaMakom, Baruch Hu, Baruch Shenosan Torah La'ama Yisrael, Baruch Hu, Keneged Arba Abanim Dibra Torah, Echad Chacham, Ve'echad Rasha, echad tam ve'echad she'ena yodei lishol, that we say Baruch 4 times. We bless Hashem 4 times, corresponding to the 4 sons. One who is a chacham, one who is a contrary or rebellious one who is complete as a tamim, a tam, and one is she'eni yodei lishol. He doesn't even know what to ask. Now, the Kolbo says we can easily understand why a parent would thank for the chacham, why the parent would thank for the tam, a completely righteous person, even for the she'eni yodei lishol, who doesn't yet know how to ask and we can teach him. But why do we thank Hashem for the Rasha? Says the Kolbo, we're echoing David HaMelech. David HaMelech said in Tehillim, Avorcha es Hashem b'chol eis. I bless Hashem for everything. As we know, Kishem shemevarchim al atova, kach mevarchim al hara'ah. We thank God for the good and the bad because we recognize that even the bad has a value. It might cause us to introspect. It might cause us to think, perhaps we could be better. Perhaps we could daven better. Perhaps there's something we could do, even if it's not caused by any of our own faults. But we still can think, perhaps we could be a smidgen better. That in and of itself has a value when we think about having perhaps a Ben Rasha, and maybe we could be a little better. Maybe we could daven for that child a little bit, and we can improve in some way so that we will merit that he will change from a Rasha into a Chacham, into a Tzaddik. Equally so is the concept of Matza. You know, Chazal tell us that the mitzvah of Matza cannot be fulfilled except with one of the 5 species of grain that can become chametz. If the grain cannot become chametz, like rice, if you had rice flour and you made a matzah out of rice flour, that would not be acceptable to be used at the Seder because it could not become chametz. The flour that the matzah must be made of must be either wheat, rye, barley, oats, or spelt, because each of these could become chametz. Each of them could get ruined. And so each of them has the ability to become holy enough to be used as a matzah. Again, we see the duality, that it's possible for something to be extremely negative and yet to turn out to be the most positive expression of honor to Hashem. The eating of the matzah, which is indicative of the fact that it could have been chametz, instead is turned around and becomes one of the 2 deoraisa mitzvahs that we still have at the Seder. The other one, of course, being telling over the story of the going out of Egypt to our children. And consequently, from the pasuk, Zoveach Toda Yechab Danani, that David HaMelech said in Perek Nun, that is in the Medrash on this week's Sedra about bringing the Karban Toda, we see a confluence of ideas that relate not only to Parshas Tzav, but certainly to Parshas Shabbas Hagadol, and certainly to the Seder. At the end of the Haftorah, we say, Heinei anochi shaleach lachem es Eliyahu Hanavi. I'm sending you Eliyahu Hanavi lifnei bo yom Hashem Hagadol v'hanora. Hashem will come. Erenu b'yesha Elokim. He will show us the salvation of Hashem when we recognize that everything that happens in our lives, good and unfortunately even not so good, has the ability to spur us to become better, to introspect, to think about the fact that we owe Hashem and thank Him for each and everything that we have. And that is part of the Karban Toda and Birchas HaGomel. I'd like to take this opportunity to wish everyone a wonderful good Shabbos and a Chag Kosher V'Sameach. The drasha was a little longer today, but our Chazal tell us that Shabbos HaGadol is so called because it has a Gadol drasha as one of the features. So we should be blessed that this Shabbos HaGadol should lead us into the time of redemption, that we should see not just a momentary Pesach redemption, but it should lead us to the ultimate freedom of redemption that we so yearn and pray for, b'mheira v'yameinu. Good Shabbos and Chag Kosher v'Sameach.